from the peaceful sunlight of Brentwood to the metallic sound of a heavy iron door slamming shut. In a single moment, the world of the Rob Reiner family was torn cleanly in two, not by a stranger, but by the very person they had protected for decades. This is not merely a murder case. This is the story of a collapse long foretold, of love without boundaries, of warnings that went unheard, and of a prison that can become a sentence long before a court ever speaks. When Nick Reiner was taken into the Twin Towers Correctional Facility, the most pressing question was no longer guilt or innocence. It became this: would he live long enough to reach the day of judgment? Because there are some people who do not need a life sentence to be destroyed. All it takes is time, and a place where weakness is seen as an invitation to tragedy. This is the Rob Reiner case, and this is the story of how prison begins to pass judgment before justice ever does. The Twin Towers Correctional Facility is not a prison in the conventional sense. It does not exist to rehabilitate. It exists to hold people in a prolonged state of waiting, where time no longer moves by days or months, but by each medication round, each iron door crashing against concrete walls, each sleepless night. Here, the fluorescent lights never turn off. There is no true morning, no real night. Only a cold, white glare, shining directly into the eyes, into the skin, into the mind, eroding any sense of time until the very concepts of yesterday and tomorrow slowly dissolve. Narrow corridors stretch on as if without end. Thick concrete walls, damp and heavy, carry the stench of mold mixed with metal and human waste. Iron doors open and close in a steady rhythm. Clang, clang. A sound that is enough to remind everyone of one thing. Here, you control nothing. For many, Twin Towers is merely a place of temporary detention, but for defendants with complex mental health histories, it resembles a slow grinding machine of erosion more than a legal holding space. Nick Reiner entered this place with an adult body, but with a psychological immune system that had never been conditioned by deprivation, discipline, or violence. For more than 3 decades, his world had been cushioned by money, therapy, and doors that were always left open for him to return. Twin Towers offers no such exits. Here everything is overloaded. Overcrowded cells, almost no personal space. People carrying the most serious charges, violence, murder, severe mental disorders, are forced to live in close proximity, under constant tension. No one asks whose son you are. No one cares where you once lived. Twin Towers asks only one question, in the most brutal way possible. How much can you endure? And in that environment, for someone who has never had to learn how to protect himself, waiting for trial is not a pause before justice. It is the first step of collapse. There was no transition, no period of adjustment. For Nick Reiner, Twin Towers did not erode him gradually. It brought him down all at once. According to accounts circulating from inside the detention unit, Nick was unable to maintain stability for long. On some nights, he screamed inside his cell. Not at anyone, not in protest, but as if arguing with something that existed only inside his own mind. Fragments of speech repeated, broken, spilling into the night like metal dragged across concrete. I didn't do it. Let me out. I'm at home. What was frightening was not the panic itself. It was the disruption of reality's rhythm. At times, Nick slammed his hands against the iron door, not to draw attention, but as an unconscious reflex. Minutes later, He would sink back into silence, sitting motionless in the corner of the cell, eyes fixed on the empty space in front of him. Then, without warning, he would let out a soft laugh. A laugh with no cause, no recipient. Those familiar with detention environments say this is not behavior meant to dramatize or seek attention. These are signs of a mind slipping off its axis. At certain moments, Nick spoke to himself, or rather, to memory. He whispered reassurances as if he were back in his old bedroom, the only place that had ever felt truly safe. "Mom, don't worry. I'm coming home." The boundary between present and past blurred. The jail disappeared. In its place rose uncontrolled fragments of memory. Family meals, familiar rooms, the sensation of being protected. And then, all it took was a sound. The heavy slam of a steel door, footsteps echoing down the corridor, to violently pull Nick back into the cold present. In rare moments of clarity, he could answer questions, understand where he was. But that state was so fragile that a few seconds of inattention were enough for the mind to fall freely once again. During his brief court appearances, the image of Nick in an anti-self-harm smock, loose, shapeless, without drawstrings, became a silent symbol. No explanation, no official statement. Just an unspoken admission that even the system feared the worst might happen before any verdict was ever delivered. At Twin Towers, collapse does not require violence. It needs only time, lights that never turn off, and a mind with nowhere left to anchor itself. And for Nick Reiner, the trial may still lie ahead. But his own judgment, inside his mind, began a long time ago. In prison, there is no need for loudspeakers, no notice boards. Everything spreads through glances, whispers, and prolonged silence. For Nick Reiner, the charge was more than a legal file. It was a social mark, one that placed him within the underground order without a single introduction. Murder alone is already unforgivable. But murdering one's own parents, in prison culture, marks a different boundary. A boundary where contempt does not need to be spoken aloud. No one asks for details. No one debates right or wrong. A rumor needs only a small fragment to complete the rest of the picture. And when that story reaches the ears of those who have spent decades inside the system, Nick's position is decided immediately. At the very bottom. Prison operates by an unwritten hierarchy. Not governed by law, but by the ability to inspire fear and the ability to protect oneself. You do not have to be the strongest, but you must prove one thing, that you are not prey. And that is precisely the problem. Nick entered this world without survival skills, no alliances, no reputation to make others cautious, no street pass that commanded respect. He may be physically large, but in prison, people are not measured by height or weight. They are measured by eye contact, posture, reflexes when provoked, and most importantly, whether you dare to respond. And for someone struggling with mental illness, maintaining composure is already overwhelming, let alone sending the signal, "Don't touch me." Here, weakness is not a temporary condition. It is an invitation. A gaze held downward too long, a half-second delay in response, a stuttered sentence at the wrong moment. All of it is noted, not to condemn, but to test. To test how this person reacts when pushed into a corner, to test whether anyone will step in to defend him, to test where his boundaries lie, and if no one stands beside him, if there is no sign that retaliation will come immediately, that position will be exploited. Prison does not need to strike right away. It only needs time to make one thing clear: who can stand and who will be pushed lower each day. For Nick Reiner, the Court of Inmate Society does not wait for a trial date. It unfolds hour by hour in moments so small where silence can sometimes be more dangerous than violence. In prison, mental illness is not something to be understood. It is something to be noticed. No one names it. No one asks about it. But every glance quickly recognizes who can no longer keep pace with the environment around them. Instability does not need to erupt to become dangerous. It only needs to fall out of sync. A reaction half a beat too slow, an averted gaze held a moment too long, an answer that does not match the situation. In a space where every behavior is scrutinized, those small misalignments do not disappear. They are remembered. Medication may quiet everything down, but that quiet does not mean safety. It only slows a person. And in prison, slow means readable. Readable means predictable. Predictable means testable. And when someone begins to have their reactions tested every day, the question is no longer whether they are okay, but how long they can endure before another layer begins to surface. Because the mind is only the first layer. When that layer thins, what lies beneath emerges very quickly. There comes a moment in every life when a person realizes they are falling, and there is nothing left beneath them to break the fall. For many in prison, that moment arrives very early. For others, it comes later, and it hurts more. For a long time, money was not something that needed to be considered. It arrived steadily, quietly, always appearing just in time whenever things were about to collapse. But prison does not remember the past. It looks only at the raw present. And in that present, there is no longer a flow of money, no more intervention, no one standing behind you to absorb even the smallest consequences. Lack of money is not just a shortage of supplies, it is the loss of position. When you create no value, you are not immediately pushed out. You are allowed to drift. Drift into the jobs no one wants. Drift into roles no one wishes to hold. Drift slowly away from a fragile zone of safety you never even knew existed. And when a person has drifted long enough, when there is nothing left to bargain with, nothing left to protect, they begin to reach for the only thing that can still make reality bearable. That is when another door opens. Very slowly, very silently. No one enters addiction in prison through a clear decision. It does not arrive as a sudden fall. It comes as a very brief letting go, just a day that lasted too long, a sleepless night, a moment when both body and mind say at once, just let things be quiet for a while. In that environment, need does not have to be expressed. It reveals itself. And when it does, someone always notices before you find the words for it. There is no coercion, no threats, only a path already laid open, and a price that is not named at the beginning. At first, everything seems small. An errand, one-time standing watch, one instance of taking on a responsibility. But each time, the boundary retreats a little further. No one pushes. Need itself does the pulling. And at some point, the question is no longer, what am I doing? But only, how much do I have to do this time to earn the next stretch of silence? In prison, when need replaces will, people do not disappear all at once. They wear down, slowly, steadily, until there is not enough left to call it a choice. And by then, the story no longer needs another climax. It only needs time. At some point, when the outer danger layers have worn deep enough, a person no longer holds themselves together through strength or reason. They retreat, not in space, but in time. For Nick Reiner, that retreat did not take the form of scattered memories. It became a complete place. A world that existed before everything fell apart. There were familiar rooms, meals already set on the table, a feeling of being awaited, of being forgiven before any explanation was required. In the long stretches of silence inside the detention facility, the past began to do what the present could not: give him a sense of safety. No one struck Nick in those moments. No one tested his reactions. No one asked questions. There was only a mind pulling itself away from the lights that never turn off, away from the sound of metal, away from the wordless tension. And in that past, every mistake had someone who came to handle it. Every crisis was named with softer words. Tired, needs rest, just a phase. Not because the past was perfect, but because it never required Nick to stand on his own. Prison is different. Prison has no memory. It has only the present, repeating itself. That contrast is what turns the past into a dangerous refuge, because each time Nick returns there in his mind, he moves a little farther away from the ability to exist in reality. The boundary between remembering and reliving begins to blur. The reassurances are no longer meant for anyone else. They are meant for himself, as if speaking softly enough might cause that familiar door to open once more. But what the past does not tell him is this: no refuge exists forever in prison. Time here does not heal, it strips away. And with each day, Nick retreats deeper into memory. The present loses another fragment. Until one day, the question is no longer how he will face the sentence, but this: when that day comes, how much of the real person will actually be standing before the court? Because sometimes disappearance does not require violence. It only requires a past gentle enough to make the present unbearable. By this point, all paths have narrowed to a single point of intersection. It is no longer a story about conditions of confinement, no longer about unwritten rules or layers of danger. Only the law remains, and a human being stretched between two opposing possibilities. For Nick Reiner, the upcoming trial does more than determine a sentence. It decides which reality will become permanent. On one side is prison, a place where time waits for no one, where each day passes identical to the one before, where human beings are ground down until only the function of survival remains. On the other side is the forensic psychiatric system. It sounds more humane, but it is not freedom. There, time is not measured in years, but in levels of control, in dosages of medication. In periodic evaluations, no one knows when will be deemed stable enough. Neither path offers a return to the life that once existed. What makes this choice so cruel is not that it is too difficult, but that no option truly salvages what has already been lost. The law requires a clear conclusion, but the human mind rarely moves in straight lines. A person may understand where they are, yet no longer understand who they are. They may stand before a judge, yet no longer stand firmly within themselves. And that is a void no verdict can fill. Whatever the final ruling may be, it will close only a legal chapter. It cannot close the disintegration that began silently long before. As society waits for an answer from the courtroom, another question quietly persists, rarely spoken, yet impossible to avoid. If a person has lost the ability to exist in the present, what, then, should justice punish? The act or the collapse that has already slipped beyond control? And while that question remains unanswered, time continues to move on, slowly, without emotion, carrying with it an irreversible truth. Whatever the sentence, maybe the price was paid long ago. In the end, this story does not close with a sentence read aloud in a courtroom. It closes with a silence, a space where every notion of right and wrong no longer stands fixed on two clearly separated sides. Because when a human being has slid through too many layers of collapse, When the mind no longer has the capacity to anchor itself in the present, punishment is no longer something that is about to happen. It is something that has already happened, day by day, night after night, in silence. The law may eventually deliver a conclusion, but that conclusion cannot restore what has been lost, cannot reverse choices that slipped beyond control, and cannot fully answer the hardest question of all. Are we punishing a crime or witnessing the consequence of a collapse that was left unattended for far too long? Perhaps the most frightening part of this story does not lie in whether the sentence is heavy or light, but in the fact that every warning sign once existed, and yet no one knows exactly which moment was the final chance to stop the tragedy. And when the prison doors close, they do not merely shut away a life. They leave behind a question that has never had a simple answer. If this story made you pause and reflect, share your perspective in the comments below. Where do you draw the line between personal responsibility and psychological collapse? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to continue following deeper analyses of cases where the truth does not live only in legal files, but also lies buried deep within the human mind. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing is not the crime itself, but the path that led to it.